Jonathan Kay is Canadian editor of Quillette, an Australian-based online magazine. He's also a host of its podcast, a regular op-ed contributor to the National Post newspaper, and a book author himself and for others. In fact, your most recent book is Your Move, is that right?
No, that was I think that was a year ago. So my latest book actually just came out in the last couple of weeks. So maybe you didn't know. It's called Magic in the Dark. It's a history of film exhibition, and it's centered on the 4-generation arc of a family that has owned a chain of movie theaters in New York City and New England pretty much since film was invented. Like 120 years ago. So I write about all kinds of things. It's kind of random. My subjects are kind of random, but that's my latest.
Yeah, that's quite a change from gaming.
Well, yeah, but although the book before that I did was a history of French Canada, and then the one before that I think was conspiracy theories, and I did a book about the Mossad. Like I kind of never hit the same subject more than once. I think it's an attention deficit disorder thing.
Well, it's a sign of a curious mind.
Or a restless one, I guess. Yeah.
Well, speaking of Your Move, I was going to ask you, first of all, welcome to the Bibliophile.
Thank you for having me.
And the topic of today's conversation is ghostwriting, what it is and how you particularly do it. And you're a gamer, so I'm wondering how gaming influences your ghostwriting.
never thought of that connection. I mean, so one of the reasons, look, board games it's pretty wide genre. There's all kinds of games. I've always been into historical games, games that recreate military campaigns of the past, or they simulate, political swings. There's a game called Rome where it covers the whole historical arc of the Roman Republic becoming Imperial Rome. I'm fascinated by history and by grand narratives. I love to immerse myself. When you play games, you can be a protagonist and moving armies around the board or whatnot. I think if you're a writer, you love telling stories. You love imagining stories. Many writers they do movies, they do scripts, they write for TV. These days, they may have YouTube channels or blogs or podcasts. Ghostwriting is, for me, it's another way of telling stories. It's also, part of it is just more banal. It's lucrative. Yeah. Ghostwriting for me is much more profitable than writing under my own name. I tell people financially speaking, the very worst thing I can do to a book is put my name on it.
Yes, I like that line. So then would you say, in a way, you're becoming part of the action in this, when you play games? In a way, are you stepping into this person's life and becoming part of their action?
So this is kind of interesting because I think the last chapter that I wrote in this book called Your Move, which is about board gaming, is I talked about board games as a good game, like a complicated war game or something, as an exercise in collaborative storytelling,
right?
Where the rules of the game sort of bind you to a certain, you can't do whatever you want. It's like a good novel where your characters are bound by who they are and their actions flow organically from what their personality is and what their circumstances are. And a good game can be like that. And it's a collaborative thing. You play, like you and the other person, neither of you know how the game is going to turn out, because there's a healthy stress that exists, a competitive stress that exists. Mm-hmm. When you're doing a good ghostwriting project, it's a collaborative tension. And ideally, the worst ghostwritten books is when there's no tension, is when you've got like a celebrity who says, okay, start taking dictation, and your ghostwriter is just, there's no tension because the person's just sort of copying everything they say, and that's what the book is. A good ghostwriting collaboration, there's tension because the ghostwriter is pushing back and saying, well, this is boring. Tell me more about that. Then the guy says, well, actually, I don't want to talk about that. It's private. And the ghostwriter says, well, I don't know. It's pretty interesting stuff. And why are we including X if we're not going to talk about Y? People aren't going to trust the stuff about X if you don't say Y. And then, there might be an argument or But you can't push that tension to the breaking point, or you'll kill the project. So you have to be a diplomat too.
Yeah, I guess you want to do justice to what happened. The artifice is, first of all, it has to be logical and not jump all around. But second of all, it has to hold the interest of the reader, obviously.
Yeah. Well, look, so the short answer is it doesn't have to do anything, because, I mean, theoretically, if a guy or a woman pays you to write their story, they're the client, and you could give them 60,000 words of nonsense. If they're happy with the nonsense, you've earned your money. But, and this, I actually wrote this in this essay about ghostwriting that maybe you read.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that at the top. It was in Quillette, and it was last September, I believe.
Yeah, it was Confessions of a Ghostwriter or something like that. And I think at the end I said the metaphor that is sometimes used for a ghostwriter is like, you're not somebody's spouse, you're not their girlfriend or boyfriend. It's the analogy is it's a crude analogy, but it's to prostitution. You're a literary prostitute using your skills to write propaganda on somebody else's behalf. That's like the crassest thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what I confessed is I said, I have too many emotions and feelings to be that detached about the way I practice my trade. I can't just turn a trick and walk away. Like, I feel some attachment to the product, the book. And if the book is heading in a trashy direction, like I push back. And in some cases, like, I walk away from projects. And so it's a case where the customer isn't always right. And
Yeah.
usually you're doing the customer a favor by saying, this isn't good. Like, no one's going to want to read this. And it becomes complicated because sometimes, I think I wrote in a piece that the first question as a ghostwriter you have to answer is, what's the motivation here? Who pushed for this project? Because often the person you're ghostwriting for, they didn't push for the project. It was like their chief of staff or their publicist or their spouse. They got a new agent or a new manager, and they're like, well, let's get you some publicity. Let's get a book out there. It will support, it'll be part of a multimedia strategy and all this stuff. And knowing that information is important, because sometimes you'll be dealing with the author, the person whose name is going to be on the book, and they seem very reluctant or taciturn, and you're like, well, if they wanted to write a book, why are they being so reticent? And you realize they in some cases they didn't actually want to write the book. It was their publisher.
Yeah, it's the family, as you say.
There may be people who don't want the book to be written. You'll get a publicist and a spouse who are like, let's do this. And you'll have like a business partner and a sibling who's like, absolutely, let's not do this, because then they're going to find out about X and Y. And then, I have been in some pretty delicate situations where the ghostwriter can find out like a lot of stuff that doesn't end up in the book, but is really explosive. And obviously, you have to be professional, and you sign non-disclosures and stuff. And, there's no thought of breaking your representations in that regard, but it can put you in very tricky situations, because it's never just you and the author. There's always a dozen people hovering in the background.
Right. That puts me in mind of, for years, I had a consultancy firm in Ottawa, and I wrote a lot of material for different government departments, kind of motherhood issues, going out about how to save the environment, how to fill out your income tax online, that sort of thing. And my line or joke was that in the government, they had a humor check. So if anything that I wrote was funny, they took it out.
Yeah.
And that kind of pissed me off, because I wanted to entertain the reader. But as you say, they're paying for it. I wanted to make sure that the articles got good coverage across the country. And that's what I told them. But there's no sense of humor there.
Yeah.
I guess in a way it's a similar idea. Like for you, I mean, you're a funny man, and it's entertaining.
Yeah.
How does that fly?
So as a ghostwriter, there's several problems with humor. The first problem is that humor is incredibly personal. And even if you write a good joke, it's the first sign that people who know the author, who read it, say the author didn't write that because that's not his style of humor, or
Right.
the author could never have cracked this joke. Like the kind of jokes we make, it's kind of like the way we walk or the way we talk or our signature. It's very difficult to disguise. You can write institutional prose of the kind you're talking about for government agencies and stuff, and do a reasonably good job of mimicking somebody else. But as soon as you get into jokes, no, it's personal. The other thing is, when you talk about writing for institution, it's somewhat similar in writing and ghostwriting for a famous person, because there's, just as the famous person has their retinue of people who are going to read it, in a government agency, it's always the most risk-averse person in the retinue or in the agency is the person who has veto power in the joke. And the most
Right.
risk-averse person often has no sense of humor, or it's their job not to have a sense of humor. So yeah, humor is an issue.
Again, the thing that the tension, as you refer to it, is that humor is entertaining. And I mean, if you are a good writer, you're a chameleon. You should be able to tell jokes in the voice of your client.
Yeah, but if the client could tell good jokes, he'd probably write the thing himself, right? Like,
I don't know about that.
well, let me put it this way. A necessary but not sufficient condition of good humor is a sense of honesty and looking at the world in an unvarnished way. Like it's very difficult to tell jokes if you're a propagandist or if you're blinkered, or, I mean, this is one of the problems with government agencies. Most funny people I know are good writers, and most writers I know at least have some good sense of it. It's not, you're right, it's not a complete overlap, but most of the time when I sit down with a writer, they may appreciate humor, but the other thing, I think, when you ask what's the purpose of the book, if the purpose of the book, it's often to make the person look serious or important. And humor, it's not the most obvious tool for making, say, a politician look.
No, but you want to make them human too.
Yeah, you do. Although, unfortunately, in the political idiom, humanness or humanity, whatever, it's typically like, holding babies or, being photographed with a shovel, during a landslide. Like there's a certain kind of cliche idiom of what makes a politician look human. And typically humor isn't part of that. It's unfortunate. I'd get more work if it were. But especially in Canada, when's the last politician you knew who consistently made you laugh in Canada? Can you think of any?
Well, they all make me laugh, actually.
No, but I mean intentionally.
Yes. Yes, you're right. I mean, I suppose Chrétien used to be kind of cute and good-natured. And
well, what's interesting about Chrétien is the only time he made me laugh intentionally was with that golf ball stunt at Gomery, which I think, sorry, we're going to lose our non-Canadian listeners here with these parochial references.
Yes.
If I remember correctly, that was after he was out of power. And by the way, I've seen speeches by Bob Rae, which were very funny. He's the Ontario Premier, but he was only funny after he left power.
So again, it's sort of a ability to be honest, but only when you're not in power or not trying to get into power.
I met Michael Ignatieff at a Canadian Tire on Yonge Street buying cat food, and he was super funny. But it was 6 months after he'd gotten turfed by the Liberals. So eventually these people regain their sense of humor, but first they have to become ordinary grunts like you and me.
Okay. Are you, as a ghostwriter, is it supposed to be a secret?
Yeah. Well, you have to take a look at the contract, which 99% of the time is going to say there's a non-disclosure provision. However, the people who breach this are often the authors themselves. So when I did Justin Trudeau's memoir, I wasn't going to breach confidentiality, like I'd get sued. But then he was giving an interview to Susan Delacourt of the Toronto Star, and he just blurted out, he says, yeah, John Kay helped me with the book. I was like, okay.
He didn't put you in the acknowledgements. There's no printed reference to you writing anything. Is that correct?
You know what? Let's do this in real time. I have the book in front of me. Just one sec. I think I might be in the acknowledgements, but I actually.
Yeah, so it's not a complete secret then.
No, but one sec. So acknowledgements. So here are the acknowledgements, page 333. Yes, I am 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So I'm the 16th person named.
Is it just your name, or does it say
No.
thanks for the writing?
My thanks to, and it lists about 30 names. The 15th name is my agent. I'm the 16th name.
Oh, nice, nice.
The 17th name is a guy they brought in to clean up some of the stuff that I screwed up. Yeah, so I was acknowledged, but then I wasn't explicitly acknowledged as the editorial assistant, as they're formally described, until Trudeau himself told it to Susan Delacourt, which ended up being like good for me, because then all these people came to me to write their book, and they were like, oh well, if you did this guy's book and you got elected, then
Right.
you know, surely you can do, you know, my dad started a successful dry cleaning business, surely you could do his book. I mean, so it ended up being good for me. But also you get these situations. I was at a book launch where I remember I was there with, this is actually not so long ago, with another ghostwriter who'd done a really good job on this guy's book, and it was all secret, and she'd signed all these non-disclosures. Let's call her Jane Smith. And we were at that party, and the guy whose name was on the book, famous guy, got up in front of the microphone and he'd had like 3 or 4 drinks. And he said, oh yeah, thanks all for coming. And thanks to Jane Smith who wrote this thing. And I was like, oh, wow.
That's
okay.
right.
It was just like,
yeah. Well, the whole point, I would think, you get someone else to write, ghostwrite the book for you, is to make you look like you're smart. And so if it comes out that, oh, wait a minute, I didn't even write my own book, that's a kind of, it tarnishes it. If it says that it's written, this is a book by Justin Trudeau, I assume that it's written by him. I've been duped otherwise.
Yeah. So there's a famous quote from George Will, the old school conservative columnist. He was asked about a book by Glenn Beck. And Glenn Beck at the time was kind of churning out books, and everyone knew, he wasn't writing them. And George Will said, he says, I'm not interested in a book that the author hasn't read. Which, like, not only had Glenn Beck not written it, but he probably hadn't even read it.
And that's the thing. It's all it is a freaking marketing tool.
Charles Barkley, but it's worse than that. Charles Barkley, the basketball player, this was 30 years ago, famously said there was something controversial in his quote unquote book, and it was an autobiography, and he famously said that he'd been misquoted in his autobiography. It's such a great line. But can I just say something? These things are very elastic. So I have had people come to me and say, hey, I want you to ghostwrite this, right? And then I say, okay, well, at what stage are you in the project? And they'll say, well, I've written down a few notes. Can you take a look? And they'll show me what they've written. I'm like, this is pretty good. Can you write more like this? Because then you don't need to pay me. I'm happy to be your editor or whatever.
Yeah.
And at least one of my projects, I was supposed to ghostwrite, and I ended up being an editor. And by the end of like the last chapter the guy wrote, I was barely changing a word. He was just a natural. So whenever I go into these things, sometimes people will say, I need you to do this, this, and this. And I tell them, relax. You don't know what you need until we have a conversation, because you may not need as much as you think you need. You may need conventional ghostwriter, or you may need an editor, or something in between.
You know what was very interesting to me about the Trudeau book is, as I've said before, it seems to me that you bring in a ghostwriter because you want the world to think you're either smarter or a good writer. You want the public to connect the good writing with you. And yet you use the term airheaded frauds in the article, talking about some of the clients. But Trudeau, you say, wasn't that way.
No, yeah.
He was actually smarter than his public image. It's a bit like
100%. Yeah. So, part of my job there was, I went around with Trudeau and saw him speak at public events. I don't think it comes out now because he's been in power and he's just like, he's so embittered and just, it's not a good look for him. But when he was on the hustings, 2014, 2015, he was a great extemporaneous speaker. I remember there was one event, it was a college event in the Ottawa area. I forget which college it was. anyway, and he was fielding questions, especially like in young audiences. He was really good off the cuff speaker, and he's also widely read. So like one of the reasons we got along was just we'd read like a lot. We grew up around the same time in Montreal, and we had even some of the same friends, and we were at McGill around the same time. So like we also just like read some of the same books. And
Like what?
Oh, I mean, some of it was trashy stuff. It was like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, like adolescent books and stuff like that.
Right.
But then, his dad had also like imposed a kind of classical education on them, and had read like Homer and Virgil and stuff like that, some stuff that I hadn't read. And he had a genuine interest in the stuff, and he could quote from memory high and low literature, like from the Iliad down to Sam McGee was from Tennessee. Like he knew, he had what I would call an organic love of the written word, something you can't fake. And it impressed me. And so when people say, oh, the guy's an airhead, and he's an idiot, he's absolutely not an idiot. He's absolutely not an airhead. He's an intellectually curious guy who has been trapped by the vacuous atmosphere of party politics, which requires people to talk like an automaton.
Well, you want to get it so that it's dumb enough that everyone understands, I suppose.
And sometimes it's so dumb that you contradict yourself, which is, to my mind, what's happened with some of this convoy stuff, where you've got, I don't want to get into, I don't think this is a political podcast, but sometimes with your slogans, you're so quick on the draw with the slogans that you forget what slogans you used the week before, and you end up stepping on your own toes, because often you're not actually thinking in an organic way and responding to events. You're kind of like, you're hitting the feeder bar and words are coming out, but there's no thought behind them. And that's not because these people are dumb. It's just because party politics makes people sound dumb.
Okay, so the book itself, were you kicked off the book?
No.
You said cleaned up. So maybe you could take me through the process. You started by interviewing him, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to tell too much about the process, but like I'm still bound by non-disclosure, but basically,
it's just in general sense about how you go about it. Yeah,
I generally produce a full draft of a book for a person. However, in this case, when you have a book for a politician, okay, the book is half information and half campaign platform, right? Because the purpose of this book wasn't for money. He donated all his proceeds went to the Red Cross, so he didn't make a cent out of this book. You're not doing it for money. You're doing it because you want to get elected, and everybody knows it. Like there's no real pretense. So
why buy it in the first place then?
Well, I tried to give people a reason to, because the first half of this book, and I think this is true of a lot of political memoirs, is that oftentimes, like maybe the first half of the book that tells the person's life story, yes, it'll be a propaganda version of the life story, but there will be interesting information in it. Like I remember I read a book about Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney, actually, his family's very interesting origins, even though he looks like just this boring white guy. There's a whole Mexican subplot, and of course, the Mormon stuff. Yeah. And the same is true with Trudeau. He had a really, for obvious reasons, and some not so obvious reasons, he had a really interesting home life and background. And some of the stuff I'm kind of proud of some of the stuff in the book.
Proud of what?
It's a good story. Like
you're proud of the way you crafted the story?
I elicited details that I think are interesting. There's a lot of details that are in here because I elicited them in conversations. So
okay.
That's what I'm proud of. However, I'm not a political speechwriter. I'm not a political manifesto writer. So inescapably, as the book goes on, certainly the last third of the book, by this stage, you're describing Trudeau in his iteration as, he's running for the Liberal. He wants to become the candidate in Papineau riding. He becomes a candidate. He becomes an MP. He becomes more prominent. And now, he's looking to become a leader of the party. The book, that section of the book is more explicitly political. And understandably, it had to be done up in such a way that is up to date with what Trudeau's own ambitions were at the time the book went to press. And so, like, those things are unknowable for chronological reasons. If you're writing it in March and the book goes to press in September, a lot can happen in politics in 6 months. And also, I'm not a member of the Liberal Party. right? I'm not in their caucus meetings. I'm not in their strategy meetings. So I don't know what messaging they want. So, and there's no ghostwriter in the world who could have come in and intuited all that, because you don't know what you don't know. And, you're not looking at their polling data. And even if you were, like, it's not your job to kind of craft
No.
sort of a leader party platform. It's your job to tell a person's story.
So what happened then? Once you'd finished with it, they basically had some political people look at it and say, oh, we better change this messaging.
I actually don't know.
Right.
I mean, it's a black box. And you know what? I didn't want to know, because they cash you out at that time. Your job's done. And this is the best part about being a ghostwriter, which is that once your manuscript is accepted, you walk away.
So you don't have to worry about sales or making your advance back or anything.
It's not even that. It's not even that. I'm talking about, so I've written like half a dozen books under my own name, and there's all these questions that come back to you. Oh, geez, do you think you could do this? Oh, we have another book, coming out with this author. Do you think you could promote this author in this chapter? I had one book where they came back and it's like, our legal department just spotted this at the last minute, that you quoted this guy and it's a trademark violation. It was some intellectual property thing. Like, I was running around at the last minute I was making phone calls,
right,
like to lawyers and stuff, saying, hey, can we get rights to the song lyric? It was song lyrics.
Yes.
It was a weird thing. This is a decade ago. I forget the details, but it was like really stressful. And I remember, because the New York Times review, which was a good review of my book, was just coming out, and they were scrambling to get the books on the shelves. And the impediment was this legal thing. It was like, I spent my whole week dealing with this nonsense. If you ghostwrite, you don't have to deal with any of that stuff. Like, you give them the manuscript. Right. And in that respect, it really is like prostitution, where, once you get up, brush your teeth, and you leave. And that really is an advantage, because you don't have the headache that comes with all the things that a real writer has to deal with after they submit their first manuscript.
How much do you get paid?
A lot of money. No. So it's like everything else. Because people ask me what I should charge. And yeah, I always start with the most important question is, what will they pay? Because it's supply and demand. But the other thing is, how long is this going to take? Because people say, well, it's a book. So one guy came to me and said, well, how much would you charge if you were going to ghostwrite an academic history of a military regiment? Well, if it's 20,000 words and all the research has been done for you, I might charge, I don't know, $15,000, $20,000, $25,000. However, if you have to do all the research and the thing is supposed to be 100,000 words, and you're going to have to do review, edits and second and third drafts, that might take you a year or two to do. So I might charge $100,000 for that. Like, it's.
Yeah. Well, don't you just say, well, it's a per diem and that's what it is? No,
I never say that, because
they always want an estimate of the total package. Is that it?
Yeah. And the other thing is, I don't think writers should write on a per day or per hour basis, because it creates. It's sort of like when Charles Dickens was being paid by the word. All his short stories were like 50,000 words. If your goal is to write a good book, and you can write that book in a month, you shouldn't be penalized for that, as opposed to writing a crappy book in 6 months.
Right. So right. Okay.
Yeah, that's
okay. You said you were proudest of the answers that you elicited from Trudeau. So my question is, so what kind of questioning did you do to get those great answers?
Well, so it's pulling threads, right? So when you're interviewing somebody, you have to say to yourself, if I were reading this, what's the other thing? What's the thing I would want to know before to make this interesting? And what's the thing that I would want to know after that this would make more interesting? So you have to read the book before you've written it when you're asking the questions. And sometimes you're asking the questions and the guy says, I don't want to talk about it. And you're like, you file it away and you ask them about it a week later, because sometimes the second time you ask, they will talk about it. Sometimes they say, I don't want to talk about it, in a way that indicates that they will never talk about it, and it's not worth, but you develop, over the years, you develop the sense of when it's not worth asking again. The most important thing is you need to talk to other people. So it's like, let's say you're doing a computer rendition, a three-dimensional rendition of a person for a movie, like for a CGI movie, you can never just study them from one angle. You have to use sensory measurements from different angles. And usually if I'm doing a biography or an autobiography, I usually talk to a couple dozen people, their relatives, their friends. I talk to people who knew them at different stages in life. I talk to people who knew them in different ways, professionally, personally. If they have sports buddies, it's important to talk to them. Often they tell you a lot.
There's kind of a panoramic view is what you're after.
Yeah. And I try and find people who have seen them in different emotional states. It's sort of like sometimes, people say, oh, how long should I know someone before I get married to them? And to me, it's not how long you've known them, is have you seen them in the full range of emotional states? Have you seen them in sadness? Have you seen them in happiness? Have you seen them, envious or embittered? Like, because you don't know a person until you've seen them in these different emotional states. And I try, when I'm doing ghosting, I try and find people who have seen this person. Like if their business went bankrupt 20 years ago, I find people who are with the person at the time his business went bankrupt. Because what happens is the author will give you a list of people to interview, and they're usually people who knew the person in their moment of greatest triumph, right?
Yes.
That's not always useful.
Well, it's not human, is it?
It's not human, but it is human. The impulse to say, the person I'm now is the person I really am. All that other stuff was just, which is not true. 10 years ago, that was the person you really were. And 20 years ago. So if you're trying to do a well-rounded depiction of a person, you can't just take the people who know you now. And this can be tricky, right? Because some of these people, maybe, the relationship's gone south, or you have to.
Well, that's what you want, though. You want someone who's, you take it into account, but you want the truth from as many people as you can get, right?
Yeah, but the reality is, if you're ghosting, it's essentially an authorized.
Yes.
Ghosting is a kind of authorized biography, right? And typically, and you have to respect it. And if the person's paying you money and you've signed a contract and they say, you can talk to A, B, and C, and you say, well, what are D, E, and F? And they say, okay to D and E, but not F. You have to respect that. Like you can't secretly talk to F. Like it doesn't work like that.
Right. You say that you're typically brought in by the publisher or the agent after the author, quote, has already taken a stab at it. Is that typically what happens?
Oh, it varies a lot. So it varies so much. I've been brought in by publishers. I've been brought in by agents. I got an interesting phone call a couple of weeks ago where they hadn't talked to an agent. It was two people. They hadn't talked to an agent. They hadn't talked to a publisher, but they had a plan and they had money. They weren't necessarily interested in going to a major publisher. Like they had a multimedia plan and a social media plan that would allow them to just self-publish the thing. And that would be one component of sort of a multimedia thing. That the book was one component, but it didn't have to be HarperCollins, right? It didn't have to be Penguin, or it could be just, Amazon Publishing. And
you look at the most successful book ever published in Canada, it was self-published. It's The Wealthy Barber.
Wealthy Barber was self-published. I
just heard that recently. Yeah, that's what I heard anyway.
And I mean, as you know, you can get the biggest publicity machine in the world and a major publisher behind a book, and the book flops, or it could be by Joe Schmo Publishing, and you and I may not even think, oh, that's a good book, but it catches fire in social media and book group circles, and it sells 250,000 copies. Like there's a sort of alchemy to it, and I tell people, because sometimes if they don't have an agent, they're looking to me for quasi-agent advice, and I say, look, I'm not an agent. It's not like my books are with my name on it sell 1 million copies. So if you want to talk to Stephen King, I'm not him. But I tell them, I say, even if I could tell you, which I can't, that your book has the magic quality that will potentially make it like a bestseller, that doesn't mean it will be a bestseller, because so much of this just seems to be luck. Yeah, like The Secret, or that was 100 Shades of Grey, or
Yeah, that was
Was
self-published too,
but that was
to
like
start with.
a garbage book.
Oh, it
Like
was, I know.
it wasn't even a good sex book. Like even
I
the sex in it
know.
was stupid. And so,
I
and
read
the
it.
author,
We were driving. I think we were driving in the States somewhere. I thought, okay, I should know about this. So I started reading it out loud in the car, and it's just, why the hell did this book sell so much?
but it did. It's like,
Fuck.
I forget who said it. They said it is very difficult to be unsuccessful as a pornographer. And I was like, well, this book is a
There you
worthy
go.
effort.
There's the secret. That's the secret.
But it made money, and there's some amazing books. I'm reading some book. I'm not even going to name them because I'm reading some nonfiction books right now. It's like, how is this book not a bestseller? It's so brilliant. I look
Well,
online.
you got to tell me about it then.
Well, actually, I'm going to probably have heard of it. One second, let me get the cover. You know what? I'm gonna tell you offline because I don't want to butcher the name of it. It's such a good book, but I'm gonna publish an excerpt in Quillette. I mean, part of the reason I read so much nonfiction is because
wait a sec. That's a tease for our listeners to go read it. Is that it?
Then I'm gonna find it. I'm gonna find it as I talk. I'm just saying one of the reasons I read so much nonfiction is I'm always looking for excerpts for Quillette. This book that I read, I was like, oh, it's so good. And so I'm reading it and I'm like super excited by the book itself. Like I love it as a reader, but I'm also loving it as an editor. I'm like, wow, this will be fantastic as an excerpt. So the book is called The Making of the Bible by Conrad Schmid and Jens Schroeter. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it is from Harvard University Press. And I'm reading it now. I think it came out like a month or two ago. I was like, wow, this book is it's fantastic. It's one of the best.
What's so good about it?
It tells us who we are, because I mean, not all of us, but those of us whose cultural roots extend through Judeo-Christian culture. It purports to be the history of the Bible, but it's the history of the Judeo-Christian world of ideas. It starts really early, like it starts 3,000 years ago, and in sort of the mists of time, and it takes us through. It's also a book about politics, right? Because the content of the Bible is shaped by, the Hittites and the Byzantine Empire, sort of Babylonian exile, of course, and then the Persians come in and actually get surprisingly good press in some respects from biblical sources. And then a lot of the Bible is written in Greek. And then, there's Egyptian subplots. You're reading it and you're reading like, this is the history of the Middle East as projected on this incredible crowdsourced literary project, which we now know as the Bible, but at the time was going off in 1,000 different directions. Like the section toward the end of the book is about the New Testament. It's just crazy. I mean, there's so many gospels that were common currency in like 1st and 2nd century Asia Minor that like never made it into the Bible, right? They were, or all these Pauline letters. There's a bunch of them that made it into the New Testament, but there's a whole bunch of others that didn't. Letters from James and Luke, the Old Testament.
So how does this relate to ghostwriting then?
Oh, it doesn't at all.
But can you make that connection?
What I would say is, the kind of books, like in my dream world, the kind of books that I want to ghostwrite is this kind of book. Like I love books. So, problem is these aren't the kind of books that most people want ghostwritten, because most of the time someone wants a book ghostwritten, it celebrates a person rather than an idea. Whereas I love reading books and writing books about ideas. For me, the best project is when somebody comes in and says, I want to write a book about my life, but the book is also about their industry. So for instance, this book I just collaborated on, it wasn't a ghostwriting project, but this book that I just put my name to called Magic in the Dark, which is a history of film exhibition. It was amazing because I profiled this guy's family, Charlie Moss, who's my co-author on it. But I was also educating myself about this like incredible history of film exhibition and the people who pioneered it, which like I didn't know anything about. And I got to spend a year like knee deep in research on it. It was amazing. There was another project I did where, unfortunately, this one did not go. It didn't end up in a book for complicated reasons. The guy was in a very specific kind of consumer product industry. And I spent like a year touring North America, all his factories and plants and learning how these things are made. And I'm a former engineer. So I was a kid in a candy store. And unfortunately, I ate too much candy because when I showed the guy the drafts of my chapter, like I was mostly interested in the industry, but he was like, no, this book has to be about how awesome I am. And I was like, okay, you're pretty awesome, but like no one's ever written a book about this industry and it's super interesting. So maybe that would be a way to get people to read the book as opposed to just like how great you are. And so we couldn't get past that, and kind of fell apart.
Yeah, that's disappointing. But then, I mean, the thing is, a writer never throws out what's done. So it seems to me that if it is that fascinating, you should be able to, or you were doing it on his dime though.
100% on his dime. And
who owns it?
Oh yeah, he owns every word of it. And he paid me well. I can't complain about it. And I signed a non-disclosure. Yeah, cleverly, okay. The non-disclosure was with an entity, not a person, so it'll survive the death of this particular person. Yeah, okay. I can't write any of it, and nor should I be able to. I mean, this person paid for my travel and my research, and if this person decides they don't want a book out of it, I couldn't just say, well, the hell with you, I'm going to write my own book. Like it doesn't work like that. So, and even if I did, I wouldn't feel right about it. I have some ethics.
Well, that's how you end the article about, you talk about content and the fact that I'm not exactly sure what you're getting at there. Obviously, if it's not true and you're being asked to write stuff that's not true, you're not gonna accept the project. Was that what you're getting at?
I actually, like every good ghostwriter, I forget what I wrote 15 minutes after I wrote it. I'm on to the next project. Well, look, you're not going to write outright lies. And to be honest, I'm not sure I don't think I've been asked to write outright lies, but
well, you've been asked to emphasize certain parts of the truth, but not the whole truth.
Yeah, and you have to ask yourself, how much of this do I feel comfortable with? And also, we can't all afford to be priests and angels, right? Like, if you're ghostwriting to put food on the table, and somebody says, write this down, and unless what you're writing down is like dangerous propaganda, you're probably going to do it because this is what you're paid to do. And by the way, there are thousands of people in Ottawa right now writing bullshit because that's what government flacks do. And it's not just a liberal thing, it's what conservative flacks do. It's just kind of goes with the trade. And it's what corporate flacks, Oreos are the best cookies. Okay, maybe Oreos aren't the best cookies. Like,
that's right. We never get the whole truth. Yeah. What about getting the voice? Is that important to get to when you were doing Trudeau's book? Was it like what is his voice and how did you get it? Do you just tape him and kind of get a sense of the rhythm or what?
For whatever reason, I think I have a gift for that. Is I can sit in a room with a person for a short amount of time, and I've been told that that's kind of something I'm good at doing.
Is what sort of mimicking a voice?
Mimicking the patterns of the way they communicate and putting that in. And that's a quality. I think that's a skill you either have or you don't. I'm not good with music, but like you can play a song for somebody and then they'll sit down on the piano and play it back for them. You either kind of have that ability or don't. I think it's true for ghostwriting, for getting the tone right. There were two projects I did, one that I actually just described, where even though there was no book that came out of it, I was told that I'd gotten the person's voice right. I was using the voice to tell a story they didn't want to tell. So, and that can get a little spooky, right? Because over the course of the project, you're kind of learning sort of like a Don Quixote thing where you're sort of like voicing somebody else, and it can make them feel a little unsettled if you get the voice like too right. So it's a skill, but it also feels a little unsettling. And sometimes you don't get it right. And this goes back to what we were talking about humor. One of the most common things he says, I would never use that word. That's one reason I never use what I would call like unusual or idiosyncratic formulations. Like there are just some people who in their entire life have never used the word moreover, or they've never used the term, perchance, or like I mean, I think most people know what the word moreover means, but probably 50% of people have never used the word moreover. So whenever I'm writing a word, I always say, am I putting down a word that the person's going to be like, aha, that's a tell. It's sort of like a poker player who like gives a little twitch when he has a good hand. Like, so I try and keep the vocabulary kind of neutral, and I concentrate on rhythm, right?
Yep.
Most people, when they communicate, they have a certain rhythm. And often I don't have written samples to work from, because you'd be shocked how many incredibly smart people never write a single sentence. Including
But you've got a tape recorder though.
I have a tape recorder, but I don't use it. Like I use it as reference, but
Right.
I never listen to it. I'm taking notes when I'm 90% of what I'm doing is listening. I'm listening for rhythm, and I'm listening the details. If there's a name or a date or something, I'll write that down. But I'm using my ears. I'm not. The recording is just there for backup.
So that's the number one thing, is it? Rhythm, and then like you were talking earlier about being proudest of having pulled out details that are really interesting that probably haven't been made public. How do you do that?
So when you're writing an editorial or an op-ed or any kind of essay, how do you decide what gets included and what doesn't?
Right.
The way you decide is you start from the conclusion. Say, what am I trying to argue? And if what I'm putting in here doesn't help advance my conclusion, it doesn't belong here. You kind of have to use a same kind of approach when you're writing a book like this. It says, what's my goal? My goal is to tell a story. My goal is to get people to know this person. This chapter is about getting to know him when he was a teenager. What's important to include so that people know who this person was, what their life was like, make them feel like they're in the same room with him. And if the person says to me, oh, my mom was a wonderful person, she was XYZ, I also had a father. Anyway, so then I'm like, well, okay, wait a sec. Let's talk about your dad. Right. He says, now, by the way, this is a comically stupid example I'm giving. If the person says, I don't want to talk about my dad, what I say to them is, it's fine. There's a million reasons, so the first sentence of Anna Karenina, right? There's a million reasons you don't want to talk about your dad. I get that. The problem is, if you don't talk about your dad, you're not talking about you. It means that when the person is trying to situate themselves in the room with you, there's a whole section of the stage that's just a blur. And if too much of the stage is blurred out, the sense of immersion is lost.
For you as the writer, you draw the analogy with the lawyer. You have to know all the sordid stuff in order to be able to tell the story better. You're not going to necessarily include all the sordid stuff, but you want to know it so you've got a good handle. Yeah,
and sometimes people take that to a ridiculous extent, and they tell me all kinds of stuff. And I'm like, okay, well, I love the spirit, but this is too much maybe. But better that than the opposite. And yeah, or I don't know if I put that in the example, but it's when you go to the tailor, you don't suck your gut in, you let your gut out, and then it's the tailor's job to make you look good anyway. That's a Simpsons reference. This is a scene where Homer is getting a suit made. And yeah, the lawyer, this is a stock scene in every Pulp Fiction thing. With the lawyer comes and says, I want to know everything. I can't protect you unless you tell me the truth. To some extent, ghostwriting works the same way. That puts me in mind, and we're just winding down here. That puts me in mind of Tarantino, who apparently wrote a novel for each of his films. And then I guess he gets his actors to read it, but then he drills them with all sorts of questions about that character so that they really know how that person would act in different situations. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of, I mean, you hear all these crazy stories about actors who show up on set and it's like, hey, Joe, it says, my name isn't Joe, it is Frederic, like I'll say them. And it's like, okay there, Frederic, you want to go get a sandwich? Like, and I suppose that helps some people. I mean, the thing about me is I have no pretensions that I'm any kind of artist. Like what I do is trade. I'm a hack. And
but you're not a yes man.
yeah, but you know what? So there are plenty of tradesmen who aren't yes men. If you ask a guy to come design your kitchen and you say, okay, I got this great idea. I'm going to have 3 fridges over there. And then the oven is going to be, I'm going to bury it horizontally in the ground. So you open the door up toward your face, and there's no sink and like one cupboard. The guy's going to say, wow, that sounds like a really stupid kitchen, and you're not going to be able to sell this house in 10 years. And you say, hey, I don't want any lip. Like, just like, and if the guy has lots of work, he's going to say, well, I'm not going to do this job because this is a stupid kitchen. Like, if he's doing his job, he's going to say to you, I think we either need an architect or you need to like think about what you want for the kitchen, because I can do all these things, but I don't feel right taking your money on this.
Right,
or he may say, I don't have any other work and I'm late on my mortgage, and I'm going to give this guy his 3 fridges and his stupid kitchen because I need the money. I'm in the fortunate position of not being able to build a stupid kitchen. Like I can say, let's build a now, yes, at the end of the day, you still have to give the guy a kitchen he wants. You can't say, I'm taking over this project and this is going to be my kitchen. It's his kitchen, and you have to be able to walk away from the kitchen when you're done. But it's nice to be in a position where you feel at least proud of what you've done, even if it's not exactly the kind of kitchen that you would have designed.
So, as you put it in the article, you must respect the chain of command, and you can't get huffy and precious about being an artist.
Yeah, but I always do. I mean, that's the thing, is part of the tension is inside you. It's not, there should be tension, creative tension with the other person. And by the way, I should just say, this book that I just finished, I just published, Magic in the Dark, I kind of was like kind of egotistical, like I'm the expert writer, and my co-author, this guy Charlie Moss, he's this fabulously successful business owner. But there were a couple of times where he said, hey John, I think this chapter doesn't work, you got to like take this out. And I was like, oh my god, you're right. Like like he was like, you have to be modest, where everyone needs an editor, and this guy gave me some shockingly good editorial suggestions. It was like me walking into his business and saying, hey, don't show the Avengers, show Spider-Man. Like that didn't happen, by the way. So everyone needs an editor. So so there's creative tension with the other person, but there's also creative tension within yourself, where you're always pushing back. Part of you is saying, just do what he wants, finish the job. But I keep saying he. It so happens I mostly work with men, but obviously this, I don't want to be gendered. But
on that point, you do say that it's difficult for you to get the voice of a woman.
Yeah, it's and I had a good project going with this actress, and I did a couple of chapters, and I volunteered. It was my idea. Actually, maybe it wasn't my idea. I was certainly relieved, because I couldn't. It wasn't just that it was a woman. It was, I got to be delicate here. It was a very stereotypically female thing. Like, it was somebody who had had a serious illness and recovered. And the way they recovered was like kind of through sort of spiritualism, and I think there was like a yoga thing, had some kind of vegetarian diet. Like, it was a book very much aimed at women by an author who was like very much was, in a cultural sense, like it was a very identifiably female set of themes in the book.
And it worked. That
worked for her, and they found a female ghost, and I think the book did well, and everybody was happy, and they were happy with me because they were happy with me for leaving. Sometimes
get your mail ass out the door.
Yeah. And I was actually relieved not to do it, because I was like, I didn't know what I was doing, because I could kind of get her voice a little in a technical sense, but it's sort of like, we were talking about acting before. It's like the actor who turns to the director and says, what's my motivation? I wasn't getting her motivation. So sometimes the reason I've done well with books like by sort of industrialists and computer guys, and it's like, there's like, I want to build this amazing computer program and everyone's going to have this app on their phone. It's like, I get that. That's cool. And so I know the motivation, and I don't, but if in the case I just described with this female, I didn't get it. And so I was glad that I didn't go forward with that project.
Okay. So can you just quickly summarize what you think ghostwriting is in a nutshell?
So ghostwriting is, it's about helping people, which I know that sounds cliche, but it's about storytelling, and you're helping someone tell a story. And they have a story that for whatever reason they want to tell the world. And ultimately, in a single sentence, your job is to help them tell the world that story.
Invisibly.
Invisibly, usually, unless they out you. It helps if it's a story you're interested in. It helps if it's a story that you think is an important one. It helps if you think the way this person wants to tell the story is truthful and edifying, but you're probably going to have to make at least some compromises on all those factors. But at the end of the day, if you don't enjoy telling stories, well, you're probably not going to be a writer. But if you enjoy telling stories and you don't need your name on those stories, it's a great way to make a living.
Okay.
Also, you get to meet famous and rich people. I flew private to Florida in a corporate jet. It's the only time in my life I'll ever fly private. And like the whole trip, this woman was giving me these like cocktails and fancy nuts I couldn't even pronounce. There was all this like, there's a special lounge we got to sit in at the airport. And of course, the guys I was with, they didn't care. Like they do this every week. And I was like, oh man, this is awesome. I feel like James Bond. And on a totally superficial level, there's a lot of stuff like that, where because if a person's famous and successful enough to hire a ghostwriter, he's probably famous and successful enough to like take you to some pretty cool places to do your research. Let me put it this way, I will probably never be in the Prime Minister's office again in my life. That was pretty cool.
Because of this, your life is more interesting.
And his life is less interesting. I'm not sure it's more like
doing all this stuff is interviewing the Prime Minister.
It's cool. Yeah.
In his office. You can tell that story to your grandkids.
Well, my grandkids won't care, but you do. So that's some consolation. It's also, I got to say, it's also disillusioning because, there's a million reasons why I'm not suitable for politics, many of which I've put on vivid display during this conversation. But even if I were suited for politics, the experience of doing that book was absolutely enough to say, oh my God, I never want to do this. It's exhausting. Like, why, one reason Justin Trudeau didn't write his own book, he didn't have time. He's like driving from one rubber chicken dinner to another and shaking hands in nursing homes and kissing babies and giving speeches to 19-year-olds at colleges. And, you never see your family. It's really tough. And then you get elected and guys like me are talking trash about you because they don't like your policy. So it's a terrible way to make a living.
Well, it's also really sad because you want the best people to represent you in politics, and all this shit just scares them off.
Yeah, well, it's hypocrisy because all the shit is caused by people like me trash talking them on Twitter. And like, we say we want the best people, but then best people step forward and we're ruthless because it's it's democracy. I get to say what I want. And it's true. I mean, we do get to say what we want. Unfortunately, you have some very, very smart people who could be making tons of money in private practice. And instead they're making like 150, 200,000 a year, which I realize is a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money for the most successful people in Canada. And they do it so that they can be ruthlessly torn apart by everybody from journalists to other politicians to activists to just millions of random people on social media. And I got a pretty good look at that. It's a tough life. It's a tough way to make a living.
Okay, final question. Best advice to someone who wants to get into and start competing with you in ghostwriting. What's the best advice on how to do it?
Well, before you become a good ghostwriter, you have to prove you know how to tell a story. The best training for that is to write in areas where there's an appetite and a market for writing, where you can build your craft and demonstrate what you can do. And so that could mean technical writing. It could be writing for trade journals. It could be writing for local media. To my mind, like, let's say somebody is in the banking industry, and they want to write, they're a bank president and they want to do like, the history of the Bank of Nova Scotia, or the bank, trying to think of a fictional bank. The ghostwriter they pick might be somebody who's like a financial writer they admire, who they may not be a newspaper writer. It may be somebody who writes like a weekly newsletter for a trade group, or this, there are some people who, I actually have a friend who did a PhD on banking, history of the Canadian Banking Association, which I know sounds very dry, but I think he turned it into a book, and he became a very good writer. And you get on the radar of people in that industry who are like, you know what, I don't have to spend 3 months bringing this person up to speed about what I do.
Yeah.
Proof of concept, they've shown me that they're a good fluent writer. So you don't have to be like a columnist for a daily newspaper, or like a star podcaster or blogger to get yourself on the radar. And then, by the way, once you do your best-selling, history of the Bank of New Brunswick, then you could kind of move diagonally to more general projects, and you can start developing your craft with things that aren't necessarily in your subject matter specialty.
Well, John, thank you for your genuinely useful, interesting responses to my questions.
That's the most flattering thing anyone has said to me in like 6 months.
Well, I could say some more things, but
no, then I wouldn't believe you.
I was going to say, I know you have. Were you tweeting during our conversation? That's my last question.
I was not, and I don't do that. I only tweet what I observe and see typically. So the tweet would be like, "God, will this guy ever shut up?" Or, "I can't believe I said that to the podcaster. I'm gonna get canceled." No.
Okay, well, that was terrific, and thanks for showing up in person instead of your ghost. I prefer the real guy.
Thanks so much. I appreciate your interest.
Okay, bye for now.